In these last months or even years, there has been a lot of talk about the F-16 and how a fighter of these characteristics could affect a conflict like the one in Ukraine and Russia. But why has training Ukrainian pilots to fly this plane taken over a year? Why is Russia likely scrutinizing all Ukrainian roads? Or why is the F-16 likely hiding from Russian Sukhois? That's what you're about to discover. The F-16 is one of the most manufactured fighter planes in history with about 4,600 units. It is currently operated by more than 25 countries and is known for being extremely maneuverable. The idea of manufacturing a light and aggressive plane comes from the Vietnam War, where the Americans realized they needed a much more maneuverable plane because the Soviet planes were humiliating the F-4 Phantoms in air combat. After this decision, the United States got to work and began designing several of the planes that would mark the beginning of a new generation of aircraft. One of these was the F-16. This is a multi-role fighter capable of performing ground attack or air superiority tasks, known for its great maneuverability and low operating costs. The key to its design is based on the use of a single engine. This significantly reduces the aircraft's weight as the engine is its most compact component. Paradoxically, one might think the plane would have little thrust for this reason, but no. We're talking about a thrust of about 80 kilonewtons without afterburning and about 140 with all the power at maximum. This gives the F-16 a thrust-to-weight ratio greater than 1, and when this happens, it means that the plane, in theory, is capable of ascending like a rocket vertically and without losing speed. In fact, it is one of the planes with the highest thrust-to-weight ratio, but be careful with this because this figure varies for any moment of the flight because as it consumes fuel or missiles are fired, the weight of the plane decreases, so this ratio will also change, but these are more or less generic data. As we have mentioned, maneuverability is one of the strong points of this plane, which can withstand up to 9 Gs. Fighter jets experience these forces during sharp directional changes. For example, if we compare it with an F-18, which has a limitation of 7.5 Gs, in the case where both planes made a 180-degree turn at the same speed and maintaining the maximum Gs, the F-16, thanks to being able to withstand more G-forces, will have a much smaller turning radius than the F-18, making it much more lethal in a dogfight, where aggressiveness and maneuverability are vital. In addition, this plane has an unobstructed all-glass cockpit so that the pilot has full vision. A curious story about this plane is that it made its first flight on February 2nd, 1974, but upon closer inspection, it shows that on January 20th, 13 days earlier, it had already made its first flight unexpectedly. How unexpectedly? Well, it turns out they were doing a high-speed runway taxi test when suddenly the plane lifted off the ground. Since it was not prepared to fly, the control system was not properly programmed, which caused the plane to enter a cycle of instability. Faced with this, the pilot simply decided to power up to take off and try to land a while later. Finally, a successful landing was achieved, although there were a few damages to the plane, but it was able to be repaired, and a few days later, exactly 13 days, was when the F-16 officially flew for the first time. This shows how important the computer control system is for this aircraft. It absolutely depends on it. If this plane was damaged or poorly programmed for any reason, could not fly, although this is one of the fundamental characteristics of 4th generation planes. Since a computer handles the plane based on the pilot's commands, it can be designed to be naturally unstable, with the computer continuously adjusting control surfaces to correct the instability. Thanks to this, the maneuverability of the plane is much better. The first fighter plane that used this idea was the F-16. Since its first flight in 1974, the plane has been continuously evolving. Over the years, its updates have made it so that even though a current model and the first model may look very similar physically, they are actually two completely different planes. In the F-16, the different updates are referred to as blocks, with Block 1 being the first model of all and Block 7072 being the latest. This is critical as it will reveal which version Ukraine will get and its capabilities. But really, an F-16 Block 70 destroys several F-16 Block 10s. And no, that it's not the plane, but the pilot doesn't count here because it's as if they were two planes from different generations. In fact, many experts claim that it should take another name instead of continuing to be called F-16 because in practice, they are planes that have completely different capabilities. I'm telling this just so you understand the great difference there is between the different blocks. The updates have been improving all the systems, but the most important improvements come in electronics, because over the years it is what has evolved the most. So the radars have also been changing, and this has given much superior capabilities to the newer versions, such as seeing enemies from much further away, being able to focus on several at once, and apart from this, things like the engines have also been improved, which are much more efficient, generate more thrust, and the quantity and quality of the weaponry they can carry. In the previous video, which I uploaded a few weeks ago, we saw the board game that is set up with the F-16 to see which country could provide them to Kiev. I recommend it if you haven't seen it, but the conclusion was that the Netherlands and Denmark are going to be the first to deliver the F-16s, because they are actually going to decommission them to replace them with F-35s. Be cautious, as decommissioned units are likely outdated. So what block are these F-16s? Well, between the two countries they have several models, but the most modern is Block 20. Yes, although it seems possible that they may have some extra updates apart from those that this model already had. Essentially, the F-16S to be delivered to Ukraine will be Block 20 at most. This plane is not what many people believe. Of course it's a fantastic combat plane, but it's outdated. If European countries are getting rid of it, there's a reason. But watch out, because this plane is probably better than the MiG-29s that Ukraine is operating. The F-16 issue dates back to the conflict's early months. The approval of the planes took several months, but it was finally achieved. This is because there was fear that Russia would respond to the countries that provided the fighters. Even though this was eventually approved, the planes have taken a very long time to arrive. This is because the training of the pilots is extremely long. All these delays have nothing to do with the planes, but with the pilots. Firstly, Ukrainians have had to learn English. Secondly, the F-16 is a radically different plane from the ones Ukraine was already operating, like the MiG-23, MiG-29, or Sukhoi 27. And mind you, let's not forget that it's not just about training the pilots. All the maintenance staff also needs to be up to par, and it's estimated that each combat aircraft requires about 10 people to operate. A Ukrainian pilot who has finished the plane's training said this: "It's like going from an old Nokia to a new iPhone without all the intermediate steps between both phones." In addition, they are being trained to handle the plane at the highest level. They won't be able to hesitate for a single second once they're operating it, as they're going straight into battle. At this point, we might ask ourselves, what planes should the F-16 be up against? The Russian Air Force operates numerous attack and fighter aircraft. They have MiG-29, which could be similar in their functions to the F-16S. Then they have Sukhois 27 and their 30 and 35 variants, which are actually notable improvements of the Sukhoi 27, and they also have the Sukhoi 34, a plane focused on ground attack. However, it has a fighter-like appearance, and I personally think it's a beautiful plane. As interception aircraft, they have the MiG-31, a plane capable of reaching Mach 3 speeds to intercept any threat. This plane has been carrying the hypersonic Kinzhal missiles Russia deployed in Ukraine. Many of you may expect me to discuss the MiG-35 or the Sukhoi 57, but Russia has fewer than 10 units of each, making their deployment in Ukraine unlikely. In recent weeks, we have also seen news that Ukraine has damaged a Sukhoi 57 in an attack on a military base in Russian territory, so it is possible that they do not want to risk more units of these fighters and simply keep them even further away from the border, especially considering that the Netherlands seems to have given the green light to Ukraine to use the F-16s against Russian territory. But we'll discuss this now. So in a hypothetical case of a one-on-one where there were no other external actors, we could likely ensure the F-16 Block 20 would outperform the Russian MiG-29. It might possibly fight against the Sukhoi 27, but this is not certain. And considering that the Sukhoi 34, the Russians are using it for ground attack, they could probably also shoot down one of these if they encountered it, because this one would not be prepared for a dogfight. An F-16 Block 20 would struggle against a Sukhoi 30 or Sukhoi 35s. Many people could be mistaken at this point. The Sukhoi's superiority isn't just due to their greater maneuverability, but also their radars, which are significantly better than those of the F-16 Block 20. And this allows them to detect the F-16s much earlier than an F-16 could detect them, so they could literally launch a missile at them without the F-16 knowing there's an enemy plane ahead. In regard to this, it's important to know that nowadays it's most likely that fights between fighter planes will take place at a distance, what is known as beyond visual range, which means beyond visual reach. Given that the radars carried by current planes are capable of detecting other planes hundreds of kilometers away and having missiles with also a lot of range, the fights would take place from tens of kilometers away. The F-16S can carry 6 missiles, typically a combination of AIM 120 AMRAAMs or AIM 9 Sidewinders. The first of them is a long-range missile guided by radar. This would apply when a plane is detected dozens of kilometers away before the pilot visually spots it. This missile has its own active radar, allowing it to be independent of the launching aircraft. This means that as soon as the missile separates from the fighter, its own radar is the one that detects the enemy and pursues it. On the other hand, the AIM 9 Sidewinder is a short-range infrared-guided missile. This would be the missile that would be used in case both planes were close together. Bear in mind that by close I mean about 10 or 20 kilometers. That's much further than a pilot can see because a fighter plane in the middle of the sky is not visible. It's simply a dot. In addition, the F-16 uses a 20mm cannon with 500 bullets, and as it can also carry out ground attack missions, it can carry several bombs or even anti-ship missiles. But there are many variants, and which one the plane can carry will depend on the exact version and modifications that the F-16 to be delivered to Ukraine has received. High-speed anti-radiation missiles could also be used, which are guided towards radiation sources. They exploit the constant radiation emitted by ground radar systems to guide themselves and target those systems. There has also been much discussion about using Harpoon missiles against ships. In this way, Ukraine would make it even more difficult for the Russian Black Sea Fleet. This fighter plane, besides engaging in combat, can carry guided missiles or bombs, expanding the Ukrainian army's capabilities. It exemplifies how modern fighters function. Back in reality, with Ukrainian territory full of radars and anti-aircraft defenses from both sides, we must consider how the F-16S would be deployed. Ukraine initially promised not to use them against Russian territory. Now it seems they have the green light from the Netherlands, but what is clear is that if they use them in this way, they would lose a lot of support because it's not the same to defend yourself from an enemy that invades you than to attack them. Leaving this aside, they are fully unaware that they must make the most of each of these planes because they will not have many. So before focusing on how they will use the plane, they will have to think about how to prevent the Russians from destroying them with attacks on airports. They will have to spread them out in different parts of the country. They can even try to operate them from highways, as we have seen the Ukrainians have been doing so far. Fortunately for them, Ukraine is a very flat country which allows the use of long roads as airport runways. But be careful, because this is not as simple as it may seem. The roads must be well paved, have no overhead power lines or even trees nearby. And I'm sure Russian intelligence is already analyzing via satellite which roads could be used for this. In recent days, there has been talk of the possibility of Ukrainian F-16s being stored in NATO military bases in countries close to Ukraine, such as Romania or Bulgaria, and that when they are going to carry out missions, they first go to Ukraine, have bombs or missiles put on them, and from there, they go out to carry out the mission and then return to the military base in this third country. Russia could take this as a direct implication of this third country in the war, and could bomb this base where the planes are stored. They have stated that since these fighters attack Russian territory and are stored in a NATO country, they will not hesitate to attack that NATO military base. Regarding how they would use it, it is very likely that they would not dare to carry out attacks near the border where the Russians have more missile batteries that could shoot them down. But beware, if a strategic target were identified and it was concluded that the risk was worth it, they would do it. On the other hand, Ukraine can use the F-16 defensively purely as a fighter to go out and intercept ground attack aircraft or Russian planes that get too far into Ukrainian territory. In those cases, they should assess whether the risk is worth it or not. For example, if a patrol of 8 Sukhoi 35s were detected and there were 2 F-16S in the area that could go out to intercept them, it is most likely that they would not go out because they would almost certainly end up losing those 2 F-16S. And even though they might shoot down a Sukhoi, it's much worse for Ukraine to lose an F-16 than for Russia to lose a Sukhoi, because even though the Russian planes are more expensive, they have many and do not depend on other countries providing them as Ukraine does. So even though the F-16 can be a plane that gives a strong boost to the Ukrainian Air Force, it is by no means going to represent a change on the board. so it's most likely that things will continue as they have been. So at this point we might ask ourselves, what would Zelensky need to give a good punch on the table and impose himself? For instance, getting significantly upgraded F-16s. The United States Air Force operates the Block 50-52. These planes are indeed a much more serious matter. The US has stated it will not provide F-16 units so far. Probably because these are too modern. But if Russia ends up destroying the F-16s that are going to be delivered to Ukraine in the first place, and there are no more countries that want to give their fighters, maybe at that moment the United States takes a step forward and delivers some of its units. Because they have more than 900, they could afford to give a few if they wanted to. Another option that could change the course of the war would be to send many more F-16 units in this first delivery. Somehow get units from various countries, even if it means buying them and sending them to Ukraine. In this way, they could try to carry out much more ambitious and risky missions. Something that was confirmed in June of 2024 is that France is going to send Mirage 2000 fighters to Ukraine. It appears that an international coalition akin to the one with the Mirage 2000 is being formed with the F-16, led by France, so that all the countries that have them can send them to Ukraine. Finally, something many of you might be curious about, whether the F-35 could ever be delivered. This could possibly help change things a lot, but the United States is not going to allow Russia to shoot down an F-35, recover some piece, and reverse engineer it. So for now, this option is completely ruled out. Share your thoughts on this topic in the comments.